June 25, 2000 night. The streets are lit by lanterns, crickets are chirping. It's empty, there are no people, everyone has already returned home, many are getting ready for bed. Meanwhile, 26-year-old Nadezhda Faris was returning home after a party with friends. At that time, the news often reported new attacks. The girl sat down on a bench near the clinic, maybe to calm down, maybe to rest, but suddenly a tall guy appeared out of the darkness. "Hi, why is someone so beautiful sitting here alone?" The young guy turned out to be very polite and charming. His broad smile helped the girl to relax a little. Her anxiety slowly began to fade. After 10 minutes of conversation, Nadezhda completely relaxed. They were already joking, and Nadezhda was laughing as if she had known this guy her whole life. It turned out the guy's name was Vladimir, and he suggested taking a walk around the city in the evening. With her guard down after the pleasant conversation, the girl didn't notice how Vladimir was smoothly leading her father away with every step. After walking about 10 more minutes deeper into the pine park, without giving Nadezhda a chance to react, the guy suddenly threw her to the ground. He grabbed a large stone and began hitting her on the head and body with it. The girl couldn't resist. After 20 blows to the head with the heavy stone, the maniac took the girl's life. She died from asphyxiation. 1979, Moscow, November 1st. On this grey autumn day, a boy was born who would grow up to commit terrible crimes and remain unpunished for 10 years. The boy, Vova, was an only child, the only child in the family. When he was little, his mother divorced her husband and moved him to a village to live with his grandmother. She left him in his grandmother's care, but even though Vova was with her, his grandmother was always busy. Even though the old cozy house was quiet and peaceful, the boy still felt unwanted and lonely. He wanted to be in a close, loving family, wanted to feel care and attention from his parents, but unfortunately his life turned out differently. His mother, meanwhile, was trying to rebuild her personal life after the divorce and worked a lot. In the Ryazan region, the boy started school. When Vladimir Mirgorod was 10 years old, his family reunited and started living in the capital again. His mother worked as an accountant, and his father was a builder, and it seemed that now everything was fine. The boy was living a happy and carefree life. But despite outward appearances, things weren't that simple. Vova took his father, who had already served time in prison for taking a life, as a role model. Towards his son, the father was cold and cruel, and Vova never felt any love or warmth from him. As Vladimir's school friends recalled, his father stabbed someone with a knife in a drunken fight because of insults directed at his wife. According to Vladimir's mother, her husband was a man of strict principles. 1986, April 26th, the accident at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Vladimir's father, Viktor Mirgorod, was one of the bus drivers who evacuated workers and city residents from the affected zone. There was an urgent evacuation from Chernobyl, Pripyat and nearby settlements. During his evacuation work, he saw many melted, burned and mutilated bodies, heard screams, cries, wailing, moans, the grinding of metal and the screeching of brakes. This also left its mark on his psyche. After the accident, he started drinking. Like many other witnesses of this disaster, like many other residents of the USSR as a whole. They say that those who were involved in the Chernobyl cleanup were almost forced to drink alcohol, supposedly to help remove radiation from the body, but in reality, so they wouldn't lose their minds. As for Vladimir Mirgorod, he was still in school at that time and behaved perfectly. He was an average student, didn't stand out in any way, didn't cause any trouble, just an ordinary guy. After finishing school, he tried to get into a university, but failed and joined the army. The service taught him even more to obey and to hide his true thoughts and true self. After returning from the army, Vladimir seemed to have changed for the better. He eventually enrolled in the prestigious Mises and got a job as an assistant to the director of a company that sold computers. At that time, it was a dream job with huge money and status. His friends adored him. Vovk, he was the life of the party, his acquaintances recalled. He was always ready to help, give someone a ride, lend money, or just listen. He had a special talent for communicating with women. Vladimir was handsome, neat, and knew how to speak beautifully. Girls were literally drawn to him. His friend Sergei Seleznev later recalled that any girl could go to the ends of the earth with Mirgorod just 5 minutes after meeting him. But there was one detail that no one noticed except his first serious love, Elena Pokrovskaya. In high school, Vladimir Mirgorod started dating her. She was his classmate. Their romance began just before graduation. But while Vladimir was the life of the party for his friends, Elena saw a completely different side of him. She recalled that he was very hot-tempered and willful. Mirgorod could lose his temper and start getting irritated over any little thing. Vladimir had his own strange way of dividing women into two groups. He considered some to be decent and others to be flighty. Later it turned out that every time he met a girl who seemed wrong to him or too easy, it was like something switched in his head. That night, when he met his first victim, Nadezhda, that terrible impulse was triggered for the first time. December 2002. Moscow is anticipating the new year. There are garlands on the windows and the air smells of tangerines and pine trees. People gather in groups and have a good time. 25-year-old Tatiana, a native of Minsk who recently moved to Moscow, was walking down the street aimlessly. She felt melancholy and inexplicable sadness that only comes in a huge unfamiliar city before the holidays. "Miss, wait!" She was surprised. Next to her stood a pleasant-looking tall man. He looked at Tatiana in a friendly way and a smile appeared on his face. "Sorry for scaring you. It's just that today is my birthday and I have no one to celebrate with. All my friends are busy." She felt sorry for the stranger, but deep down she was glad. She'd met someone she could celebrate with, have a good time with, and use to take her mind off her troubles. "Can you keep me company?" "Of course. We can buy a cake and come over to my place." She shouldn't have done that. The apartment on Leningradskoye Highway was warm and cozy. Tatiana was putting the kettle on in the kitchen while the guest looked around the room. She didn't see how his expression changed when she turned her back to him, how the friendliness instantly disappeared. "Thank you for letting me in." Those were the last words she heard. A minute later, a homemade noose tightened around the girl's neck. As he was leaving, Mirgorod took a few valuables to make it look like a robbery. At the doorstep he looked around once more. He had gotten his birthday present. And then, more and more women's bodies started appearing in parks and residential areas. Rumors started spreading throughout the city, while the police did nothing, preferring to see these incidents as isolated cases rather than a series. The then head of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, Boris Gryzlov, stated that the killings of women in Moscow did not show signs of being committed by one person or a group of people. He was echoed by the head of the Moscow Main Internal Affairs Directorate, Vladimir Pronin. "The killings committed in Moscow are not the work of one person. This is a coincidence that someone is trying to string together into a single series. If we had such information, we would have appealed to the public ourselves to provide any information that could lead us to the criminal." Journalists held the same opinion, trying to reassure readers with headlines like "Girls are not being killed by maniacs." However, by July, the Moscow police had to admit the obvious and set up a special headquarters based at the Department of Internal Affairs for the Northeastern Administrative District. In addition to local detectives, the team included the district prosecutor Viktor Kazakov and officers from the main directorate of the Moscow police. They managed to quickly solve and rule out some of the roughly 11 cases involving murdered women that were assigned to them. For example, the beaten and suffocated citizen Kulikova turned out to be not a maniac's victim. She was killed by her friend, a chronic alcoholic, who started making advances toward her, but after being rejected, got angry and killed his drinking companion. The case of the girl who was killed on Stratonot's Passage was also dismissed. She, unlike the victims in Mirgorod, was struck on the back of the head with a blunt object, while the victims in Mirgorod died from asphyxiation. This death turned out to be the work of a gang of robbers consisting of a 37-year-old man and 2 teenagers. They were caught literally within a week. Mirgorod, however, remained an elusive unknown maniac and continued to take lives. But the investigators had several witnesses who miraculously survived. The evening for the 21-year-old Central Telegraph employee Yelena began as usual. She left the metro at Radnaya and headed toward her home on Pestel Street. Mirgorod noticed her right away. He caught up with her when she was almost home, when there was just a little way left to the safety of her entrance. The attack was sudden, but the criminal underestimated his victim. Yelena did not freeze in shock. Her defense turned out to be random objects, an umbrella and an empty glass mineral water bottle. An old hobby helped her. Karate classes gave her the coordination and will to fight. For 20 minutes, the attacker tried to knock Yelena to the ground and immobilize her, while she fought back with all her strength until her screams finally attracted the attention of passers-by. Yelena even tried to negotiate with the maniac and promised him a lot of money, but all she heard in response was, "Shut up." Another girl, Katya, was 20. She studied in Khimki. That July night turned out to be fun. Club, dancing, the way home. She was already standing at her entrance and felt the keys in her pocket. She had just a second left to open the entrance door and go inside, but suddenly someone attacked her from behind. The stranger immediately grabbed her by the throat and started tightening his fingers around her throat. Someone else in Katya's place would have stayed silent. She could have gone into shock, but this girl started fighting back. This struggle lasted for almost half an hour. It's frightening to imagine where the girl found so much strength and how no one passed by. Everything ended only when a car drove into the yard. Mirgorod knew how to choose deserted places. The headlights scared off the attacker and he just ran away, leaving Katya in shock at the door. It deserves special attention. Another incident also deserves special attention. The Vesti journalist Nastya Uskova was walking home from work. The road ran along the very edge of the big green park. It was quite quiet, with only the steady click of heels on the asphalt path. The girl didn't even notice that a man had been following her almost from the bus stop. He was getting closer and closer, moving silently and purposefully. Suddenly, something tightened around Nastya's neck. She couldn't even put up any resistance and passed out from lack of air. As the doctors later said, she experienced clinical death. Her heart didn't beat for 4 minutes. When he saw that the girl was dead, Vladimir despaired. He wanted to torment a living person for longer. He started reviving her by performing chest compressions and artificial respiration. The maniac was reviving her, saving his victim only to take her life a little later. After 3 minutes, he managed to revive her and dragged Nastya to the nearest park. The half-alive girl wasn't thinking about anything. She just wandered to the park under Mirgorod's pressure. Pure chance saved Nastya. The criminal stumbled over some root in the dark and cursed loudly. And for some reason, that worked on Nastya better than smelling salts. She instantly came to her senses and realized what was happening. She broke free from the maniac's grip when he stumbled, quickly kicked off her heeled clogs, and ran for the exit so fast that, despite his immediate reaction, he couldn't catch her. Another victim escaped, but there weren't many like her who reacted so quickly. The maniac simply couldn't catch her. Thus another victim slipped away, but there weren't many like that in his record. That terrible summer, Mirgorod continued to regularly supply Moscow morgues with the bodies of young women. Each new killing resembled the previous one, but the investigators either couldn't or didn't want to see a pattern in it. On July 11, near the fence by the dog park, right next to Startovaya Street and Jungarovsky Pond, the body of a 32-year-old teacher was found. A quiet neighborhood, an ordinary morning, and such a terrible discovery. Just over a week had passed when the city was shaken again. On July 19, near Building 232 on Leningrad Highway, a girl was found who had died from asphyxiation. She was a first-year student from Timiryazev Agricultural Academy. There was a thin blue mark on her neck, indicating the use of a special tool. The girls were not suffocated with bare hands. Only then did the investigators begin to understand. The maniac doesn't stay in one place. He expanded his hunting territory, going beyond the eastern and northeastern areas. Apparently, they were already working on the theory that there was a maniac in the city. On July 27th at 6 a.m., when the city was just waking up, passers-by stumbled upon another nightmare. On the playground of building number 8 on Otradny Proyezd, Vera Vedeniva was lying there. She was 42 years old. She lived nearby on Dekabristov Street. The criminal didn't just take her life, he completely undressed her and violated her. He just threw all her clothes into the nearest bushes. Literally 3 days later, on July 30th, news came from Khimki. There, on the bank of the Setun River, they found 18-year-old Vera Kosolapova. The girl came from Naberezhny Chelny and was studying in her first year at the Institute of Management. It turned out she had been missing since July 18. Vera had a big argument with her parents and ran away from home, not knowing that death awaited her in the big city. Mirgorod did the same to her as he did to the others. He stripped her, abused her, and left her. In this case, on the riverbank. There was still a belt tightened around her neck. Vladimir Mirgorod acted as if nothing had happened during those days. He came to work at his computer company, politely greeted his colleagues, and calmly performed his duties. No one could have imagined that this unremarkable man turned into God knows what at night. He took advantage of the fact that the police considered these cases to be separate robberies or domestic disputes. His signature was a ligature. Most often he used an ordinary men's belt or a rope. His unassuming nature and cold-bloodedness helped him stay at large. The investigation worked tirelessly, trying to find any clues and spot inconsistencies. However, by August, Mirgorod sharply reduced his activity. Later, in a conversation with journalist Yeva Merkacheva, he explained this by saying, "By the way, I'll leave additional materials on Telegram," that he was really scared and truly wanted to change something. Perhaps he simply decided to lay low after sensing danger, or maybe the reason was something personal. Around the same time, his common-law wife became pregnant. One way or another, a temporary lull set in. His last known victim to date, the one that investigators added to his record only in 2025, actually dates back to April 2004. And yes, you heard right, it was in 2025 that more victims were added to Mirgorod's record. That's an interesting storyline, and we'll talk about it later. She was 22-year-old Larisa Terekova, a resident of the Kovrino district in the capital. Mirgorod attacked her at the entrance of her building at 9 in the morning when the woman left her home and was on her way to work. The crime scene was exactly the same as in most previous cases. Brutal assault, death by asphyxiation. The maniac left the naked body at the same spot, not even trying to hide it. At the end of 2004, the maniac who had terrorized people for 4 years suddenly disappeared. As it turned out, in December he got together at the table with his friend and a female friend. They were fooling around. They chatted about life, reminisced about the past, laughed loudly, but the cheerful atmosphere quickly disappeared. When the girl stepped away, the two men left alone started discussing how easily they could charm her and win her over. Vladimir was used to getting this without any effort. He had always been successful with girls, and they were willing to do a lot for him. But his friend didn't think so. Confident in his superiority, he stubbornly insisted that he was better than Vladimir and that the girl would choose him. The conversation turned into a heated argument, and now they saw each other not as friends, but as rivals. When the girl returned, Vladimir spent all the remaining time trying to impress her, eagerly waiting for the moment he could prove he was right. In the evening, when the two of them waited for the perfect moment, the men suggested to the girl that they continue the evening in a more intimate setting. The answer came instantly. Without any explanation, she just shook her head. There was no anger or resentment on her face, only disappointment in the people she considered friends. Vladimir, after being refused, became furious because nothing like this had ever happened to him before. Under the influence of uncontrollable aggression, he decided that if she didn't appreciate his superiority willingly, then she would be forced to. Grabbing his friend by the arm and dragging him into another room, he quietly said, "She won't leave just like that. If she doesn't want to do it the easy way, we'll take her by force, together." After leaving the room, Vladimir and his friend took action. When the girl tried to resist, they started beating her to break her will. Vladimir's aggression, fueled by her refusal, turned into a terrible crime in which his friend became an active accomplice. They brutally sexually assaulted the girl, took a couple of her pieces of jewelry, and threw her out the door. After regaining consciousness, the victim filed a report with the police. The system worked quickly in this case. In January 2005, Mirgorod was sent to a penal colony for 6 years. The police didn't even suspect that this was far from the only case. In fact, they had caught a maniac. In the fall of 2010, the digitization of the Moscow police's card files reached the implementation stage. Now they had a DNA database at their disposal. Biological traces from past crime scenes remained, which back in 2003 there was simply nothing to compare them to. The investigators started experimenting with the new software on their computers and decided to try out the matching function by uploading the profiles of criminals convicted in recent years, thinking maybe something would come up. And when the profile of the maniac from the old archives was uploaded into the system, the computer instantly found a match. A photo of Vladimir Mirgorod appeared on the screen. It turned out his data was already in the database because he had served time. The investigators became interested. A quiet office worker, recently released from prison, turned out to be the very maniac who they had searched for unsuccessfully 10 years earlier. They came for Vladimir suddenly. He was detained right at his workplace in October 2010 when the handcuffs snapped shut on his wrists. He showed no emotion and didn't even resist. During the interrogations, he was unnervingly calm. At first he denied everything, but when he was presented with undeniable DNA evidence, he started talking. He recalled the details of each crime with such accuracy, as if it happened yesterday. In general, many maniacs remember everything in such detail. He explained why he left the bodies in those specific places, how he chose his victims, and how he made the nooses. What was most surprising was that during the interrogation he showed no emotion, behaved calmly, and even indifferently. At that time, a nightmare was unfolding at Vladimir's home. His wife could never have imagined who she had been living with. To her, he was just an ordinary husband, sometimes grumbling, sometimes strict, but overall a normal person. When they came to her with a search warrant and told her everything, she couldn't believe it. She had slept beside him, eaten at the same table, and trusted him with their child. And during that time, he could go take someone's life right after work, then come home and have dinner with his family as if nothing had happened. The investigators tried to understand what was going on in his head. Mirgorod explained everything simply. He considered himself some kind of a cleaner. He had his own strange truth. If a girl goes out late or agrees to talk to a stranger on the street, then what does that make her? That's right, a bad girl. He believed that such women didn't deserve to live. At the same time, he respected his mother and his wife. He saw all other women as objects. If he didn't like an object, he would throw it away. He felt no pity, only indifference. At first glance, Mirgorod didn't give the impression of being a dangerous person at all. On the contrary, he knew how to make people like him, easily struck up conversations, was good at reading other people's emotions, and could adapt to whoever he was talking to. That is probably why, for many years, he remained above suspicion. But behind the mask was a person with a deep emotional and moral defect. Judging by the known facts, he developed a sense of being unwanted as a child. He grew up without a stable sense of security, love, and acceptance. Of course, his father also played an important role. He was a tough, aggressive man who had been in prison. For a child, such a parent often becomes both a source of fear and an example of strength at the same time. As a result, Mirgorod probably developed the belief that closeness is associated with humiliation, and having power over other people is a way to compensate for one's own inner weakness. It's especially remarkable that he didn't seem like a social misfit. On the contrary, Mirgorod was quite successful. He had friends, a job, a family, and he attracted the attention of women. This may indicate that his crimes were not the result of loneliness or an inability to build relationships. Their source lay much deeper, in a distorted perception of people. For him, those around him were not full-fledged individuals. He divided the world into two categories, those who could be respected and those who could be used. Women held a special place in this worldview. He created his own moral rules and appointed himself as the judge. If a woman did not meet his standards of what was right, he stopped seeing her as a person. Such a mechanism is often found in serial killers. The victim stops being perceived as a person and turns into an object onto which one can project their own anger, resentment, or sense of superiority. At the same time, Mirgorod lacks the most important quality that keeps most people from committing violence: empathy. He could understand other people's emotions intellectually, but he didn't empathize with them. That's exactly why he was so successful at gaining people's trust. He knew exactly what to say, how to smile and speak, how to behave to make people like him. But this wasn't a sign of warmth or kindness. It was just a tool, cold and calculated. His ability to lead a double life deserves special attention. For most people, taking a life is deeply traumatizing and leaves traces in their behavior. Mirgorod, however, could calmly return home after a crime, go to work, or interact with friends. Such an ability to switch between different roles indicates a high level of psychological coldness and a lack of guilt. His personality also shows pronounced narcissistic traits. It was important for him to feel his superiority over others. Many of his actions don't look like outbursts of uncontrollable rage, but rather as a way to prove his own importance to himself. Even decades later, he eagerly told investigators the details of his crimes, as if reliving the feeling of power and uniqueness. For him, they weren't other people's tragedies, but part of his own life story, something he was, in a sense, proud of. One of the most frightening things about Mirgorod's personality is his ordinariness. He is not insane, not a social outcast, not some kind of repulsive character. His greatest skill was wearing a mask of normalcy. That's why those around him saw a pleasant conversationalist, a good acquaintance, and an exemplary family man, while inside, for years, there lived a person for whom another person's life was worth almost nothing. By all indications, his personality is closest to a severe dissocial antisocial personality disorder with pronounced psychopathic and narcissistic traits. At the same time, there are virtually no signs of psychosis or loss of touch with reality in the available materials. He showed almost no break from reality in the available materials. He understood what he was doing, was aware of the consequences, and deliberately concealed his crimes for a long time. A cold, calculating, and emotionally drained person. But all of this remained invisible to those around him, so at the trial, many people couldn't believe until the very end that this was the same person standing before them. I've already discussed how to spot a predator in disguise and the nice guy mask on my Telegram channel. Find the link and more info below the video. I'll add more materials to my Telegram channel. There were a lot of people at the trial. The mothers and fathers of the girls he killed came. They looked at him and cried, while Vladimir sat in the cage with a completely expressionless face. He didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't try to justify himself, he didn't care. In January 2012, his sentence was read out to him. The judge spoke for several hours, listing all his crimes. Mirgorod was sentenced to life imprisonment. He was sent to the Black Dolphin High Security Prison. There, they are watched around the clock and spend almost all their time locked in their cells. But even in prison, he kept remembering additional crimes. In 2012, this story didn't end. You'd think the person is in prison, the case is closed, you can forget about it. But in 2024, this name was all over the news again. It turns out that all this time, only the tip of the iceberg was known. While Vladimir Mirgorod was sitting in his cell, investigators from the cold case department kept working. DNA technology became even stronger, even more powerful. The databases grew even larger. And now, after so many years, old evidence started to come alive again. In 2024, investigators officially stated Mirgorod was guilty of at least 16 more murders. There were 16 and then another 16 were added. Now he is responsible for 32 murders. And he is officially considered one of the most brutal serial killers in the history of modern Russia. Here's a particularly chilling detail. Many of the women on this list were considered missing for decades or thought to be victims of accidents. Now, their families have finally learned the truth after almost a quarter of a century. When investigators came to his cell with new charges, he didn't deny anything. On the contrary, it was as if he had been waiting for this. Vladimir began giving them new statements. Sitting in a high-security prison, he described in detail the crimes that everyone had long forgotten about. He remembered all the details, what the girl was wearing, what they talked about, what the weather was like that evening, what she said to him before she died. It seemed that he carefully preserved these memories, and now he shared them with a strange kind of pleasure. This story shows that in the modern world, it's almost impossible for a criminal to cover their tracks forever. Even if you fooled the police 20 years ago, there will still be some evidence and they will find you. Mirgorod is still there, behind bars, with no chance of release. And here's another bonus case, you probably haven't heard about it. Aleksandr and Nadezhda Taran raised their children, their daughter Natalia and their son Vladimir, in an atmosphere of care and mutual understanding. It was a good family. Aleksandr, who had worked as a livestock technician, a stoker, and even an inspector, started his own business and became a beekeeper. Daily hard work paid off. He and his wife and children had a good spacious house, a household plot, and great prospects for the future. In general, everything was going well until one day, an unforeseen circumstance disrupted this measured life. When Natalia Taran, their daughter, turned 20, she unexpectedly became the heroine of a love story, unfortunately without a happy ending. She fell madly in love, even sneaking out the window to run to her dates. The young woman chose a man addicted to illegal substances as her beloved. After a while, she herself became addicted to those same substances. With each passing day, Natalia withered before everyone's eyes like a flower forgotten out of water. The blush on her cheeks was replaced by a sickly pallor, her body grew thin, and 2 dark circles appeared under her eyes. June 23, 1994 was the first day in this story, and perhaps the beginning of a series of tragic events for the Taran family. Natalia, in a serious, almost unconscious state, was admitted to the intensive care unit of the Stavropol hospital. The doctors quickly determined the cause, an overdose of illegal substances. The patient was immediately given an injection, as every minute counted. Unfortunately, whether it was because her body could not withstand the harmful effects of the toxic substances or due to anaphylactic shock caused by the medication administered by the doctors, Natalia passed away before she could feel any relief. The head of the family was shocked when he learned about it. A wave of different emotions overwhelmed him: regret, sorrow, and fear. However, the wound that opened in his heart burned with anger. He believed that the doctors were, in essence, indirectly responsible for his daughter's death. Aleksandr filed a lawsuit against Dr. Konoplyankin. He was the one on duty in the intensive care unit on that fateful day. The doctor had long since gained a reputation as an alcoholic, but for some reason he was still seen as an angel in a white coat. Konoplyankin was acquitted, supposedly because it wasn't his fault and the girl was to blame for just playing around. Aleksandr's wife, Nadezhda, couldn't recover for a long time after their daughter's death. The once cozy house now seemed to her like cold, cramped catacombs, where a mother's soul was lost with no hope of ever coming back into the light. A year passed, and the woman went to Greece to work. There, she met another man and decided to stay in the Mediterranean country for good. Now Aleksandr was left with his son. Trying to forget his wife's betrayal, he also decided to prove that he could be happy again. Natalia Zadorosnaya, a woman from the village where the Taran family lived, had known him for a long time. Now that Aleksandr had been abandoned and practically no one needed him, she entered into a serious relationship with him and even moved into his home with her little granddaughter. Life once again went on as usual. Sometimes, remembering the smile of their beautiful and diligent daughter, a top student whose life had been ruined, Nadezhda and Aleksandr devoted themselves to simple everyday joys. She is in Greece, he is in Stavropol, but once again, something went wrong. Aleksandr noticed that his son, Vladimir, who at that time, in the year 2000 was already in his 24th year, was also heading down a slippery path. He started coming home drunk quite often. Besides that, his mental state was unstable. The slightest remark was enough to set him off. He would shout, cause trouble and swear. Once he even chased his father with an axe. On October 24, 2001, they were celebrating Village Day in Aleksandrovskoye. The young people, as always, decided to throw a fun dance party. The celebration promised to be spectacular, especially with the young men eager to party. Everyone wanted to relax and have some fun. That doesn't happen often. Vladimir also came to the disco. At first there was loud music and laughter, then fierce, drunken and some completely wild screams. A fight broke out between Murat Jayev, the nephew of the local businessman Magomed Irkunov, and Vladimir Taran, and what a fight it was. Brass knuckles and metal pipes were used. It's unknown who started it first or what caused this monstrous clash, but Vladimir died. He had broken ribs, a shattered jaw and nose. Apparently, one of Jayev's blows turned out to be fatal. This event once again shook Aleksandr, who had only just begun to regain his emotional strength. He believed that Jayev was definitely to blame for his son's death. But Irkunov's relatives' involvement in this crime was never established. Aleksandr understood everything. The rich uncle took care of his nephew's well-being. There was nothing he could do. If it wasn't possible to bring those responsible to justice through legal channels, then it was time to act on his own. A plan began to form in the man's mind. In 2002, Aleksandr Taran went to the Ossetian city of Mozdok. The first thing he did there was visit a gun shop. 2 brand new Kalashnikov assault rifles were lying on display. Those were the ones he bought. Now all that was left was to wait for that very day, the day X. When the whole family, with glasses of champagne in their hands, counted down with bated breath to the start of the new year 2003, Aleksandr went outside and set off along his planned route. He had nothing left to lose. No daughter, no son, no wife. If they were alive, right now they would all be making wishes together on New Year's Eve, each their own, but alas. Aleksandr walked, accompanied by the loud bursts of festive fireworks. The snow crunched treacherously under his feet. Soon the chimes would sound. When all the solemn sounds finally faded, the man began to take aim. Right in front of him stood the luxurious house of Magomed Irkunov. Taran pulled the trigger and the shiny windows of the house rattled with a loud clang. Shards flew in all directions. The shooter didn't stop until he had shot through all the windows on the facade. Then he quickly fled the scene of the crime. None of the residents of the house were harmed, and of course, no one got a good look at the criminal's face. Everything was written off as hooliganism by unknown drunkards. In May, 2003, 53-year-old Magomed Irkunov was standing by the gate of his house, looking at the reflections of sunlight, trees and bushes in the glass of his brand new windows. Now, let someone try to shoot through them. Seeing the reflection of another person, Irkunov turned around. Standing in front of him was Aleksandr Taran, aiming not at the windows anymore, but at him, after disabling the surveillance cameras. A burst of bullets flew out of the Kalashnikov rifle. Irkunov fell to the ground dead. On September 5, 2003, Aleksandr Taran stopped in front of a house that belonged to another man, Vladimir Gresev. Previously, Vladimir held the position of chief physician at the district hospital where Taran's daughter, Natalia, died. A confident pull of the trigger and the window glass cracks from the sudden impact. One bullet flew into the house and pierced Dr. Gresev's shoulder. He survived, although he became disabled. Irkunov and Gresev were not the only victims on Aleksandr Taran's list. Now the most important thing was left, to teach a lesson to the law enforcement officers who turned out to be pathetic sycophants. On October 20, Taran went hunting again. Senior operative Oleg Tanchik had no idea that this day would be his last. Taran shot him at point-blank range. In June, the same fate befell the head of the Aleksandrovsky district criminal police, Vladimir. The bullet hit him right in the back. Finally, Taran chose to get revenge on someone else, even though this person was involved in his children's deaths. 5 months earlier, traffic police platoon commander Andrei Radchenko stopped his Volga car. He needed to undergo a medical examination. Taran refused to comply with the rules. Then, by order of the commander, the car was sent to the impound lot. On November 27, 2005, Radchenko paid with his life for this action. His pregnant wife and 3-year-old son miraculously survived. The circumstances of the crimes committed against 5 people were investigated for a very long time. Aleksandr Taran had never been among the suspects until a strange discovery was made in the forest near the village where he lived. One of the residents of Aleksandrovsky, Vasily Krotov, went to the forest to pick mushrooms. There he noticed some object wrapped in a robe. It turned out to be a Kalashnikov rifle with a homemade silencer. The local gunsmith recognized the silencer and said that it was ordered by Taran. In addition, a hair was found on the rifle, which, as later established by forensic examination, belonged to Aleksandr Taran. He was arrested the same day. During the search of the Voroshilov shooter's apartment, they found a gas pistol that had been converted into a combat weapon. An acquaintance of Taran handed over another rifle to the police, which Taran had given him for safekeeping. It was this weapon that was used in all the crimes, along with the other one found in the forest. Taran confessed to everything, but he didn't really help the investigation. There was quite a lot of evidence against him, but despite this, the jury completely acquitted the criminal. On September 3, 2009, the Supreme Court of Russia overturned the acquittal and the case was taken up for a new trial. Taran was again brought to justice. This time he was found guilty and sentenced to 23 years in prison. In addition, by court decision, the criminal had to pay compensation of 1,050,000 rubles to the families of the victims. Upon learning about this prospect, Taran stated that he was not guilty and together with his lawyer Vyacheslav Savin tried to appeal the verdict.
I am not involved in this case, Sonia. This is what my wife, who is in Greece, says. They ruined us and then they even put us in prison.
However, it was still upheld. The public reacted differently to the case of the shooter from Stavropol. Some justified his actions, saying that the man was pushed to the edge. Others condemned him, explaining, if everyone takes up arms and starts punishing the people who wronged them on their own, chaos and carnage will begin. And that's the end of the story. And whoever was listening, next week will look out the window, and at that very moment, the sun will peek out for a couple of minutes. Like, dislike, and write what you think about this case. Join us on Telegram. By the way, the scariest Strashnota video, which can't even be published on YouTube, has been released on Boosty, and check out other videos on the channel.